Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is December here in Estonia. Topic here, and that is why dating apps have really gone down in popularity for Generation Y, millennials. And this is relates to other topics in my videos, and I've spoken about the impact on Generation Z with dating apps. And I think also Generation Y, it's been very interesting. Generation Y, of course, is a pretty large demographic. It's from like the late 70s, early 80s, depending on who you ask, up to like 95 or 1996, I think. That also depends on the source. That's your general age range. And I myself am Generation Y, millennial, so I definitely understand the mindset of this generation pretty well. So dating apps actually probably became the biggest that they ever were because of the millennial generation. This generation was very much targeted by apps like Tinder, Bumble, Baidu, and I think it was maybe around 2010 to 2013 that was the years that these dating apps really started taking off. Now, there were, of course, apps like Match.com, eHarmony, but these apps were more designed for the early 2000s, and I think also for an older demographic, which was very different than apps like Tinder, which was definitely designed for younger, older teenager 20s demographic. They, of course, very much focused early efforts on getting women on these apps because developers realized that once you had the women, getting them in was pretty easy, honestly. This is typically how it works with any dating type of application or business. That's usually the more difficult segment to reach. And once they had them, very easy to get the guys on. So these apps obviously became very big. I think they worked more effectively several years ago. They weren't as saturated with guys and with females. It was much more probable as a guy that you'd find some dates through a dating app. You could get some matches, message, and probably go out. This obviously changed tremendously within just a few years. The dating apps over time became much more ineffective for an average guy. Now, almost any woman, on the other hand, could get onto an app and probably find some guys that were interested in going out and doing whatever. The dating apps, I think, also kind of started forming this reputation as being kind of a hookup app. This is what a lot of the dating apps were considered at one point some years ago. And to this day, I think this still kind of seems to be the reputation of apps like Tinder and Baidu. As time went on, became more saturated. Percentage breakdown of men to women on these apps also started to become much more saturated with men and less saturated with women. Most of these apps, it's a breakdown of around 70 to 30%. 70% men, 30% women. Sometimes it's like 60-40. Even Bumble has a pretty bad breakdown ratio-wise with men and women, even though it's inherently more designed for women, this app. So the apps, they start becoming more ineffective. And this is the main reason why the popularity started to decline big time, because guys went onto these and realized that they weren't going to get dates from these. It was just simply, you had to be in the top percentile of guys. It was as simple as that. If you didn't feel that you were like in the top 5 percentile, you probably wouldn't get like any decent quality dates. And there was certainly problems on the other end. I won't deny this one. Obviously, lots of catfishing. I spoke about catfishing in India, for example. Pakistan, catfishing is huge. I sometimes joke around with people that catfishing is a concept that almost, I think, came from India or Pakistan. And catfishing, obviously, is essentially when someone's using like fake pictures, use like a fake profile to represent themselves. Guys did this, misrepresent their credentials, and they claim to own cars that they didn't, or planes. And there were guys that were just all sorts of weird guys, of course, that got onto these apps. And so that was, of course, also a problem for on the other side. It was across genders. It was a problem. I would argue though, and say it was more of a problem for the men, because they were in a situation where women could be very picky. And often what I think happened is that these were essentially the women that weren't really sought out in face-to-face environments, or just simply don't want to have legit relationships with someone in a face-to-face environment, and just started going onto these apps because they could find basically any type of guy that they were seeking at the time. And that's what a lot of them did. The apps, of course, started becoming loaded with problems. For most guys, within like the past few years, they create a profile, they swipe and swipe and swipe. They may get a few matches over a couple months, maybe none, exchange some messages, and it often leads nowhere. This is often what it is. A girl that's remotely attractive can get several hundred matches within like a couple hours. It's insane, honestly. So they have unlimited options. And this is really one of the major reasons that the apps have declined. And I also believe why in the near future the apps will just continue to decline. And these companies, of course, will probably, they may not be existent in 10 years. Maybe they will. I don't know. They may switch over more to virtual reality or some other kind of business, but I don't think this current business model works. Maybe it will though, honestly. They could do something more like OnlyFans. Now also realize that the apps became more of like social media. It became more like an Instagram account for many girls. They just went on here, get mega attention from guys, or sometimes would even ask guys to go in and like their Instagram or add them on their Instagram. So they were just simply using it as a social media tool. It wasn't even to go out with guys or try find a relationship. Another big problem that also started happening with the millennials is that they were also asking for money from guys just to chat with them. They were asking for money, and surprisingly enough, or not surprisingly, many guys started actually giving them money just to chat with these girls. They're asking for like $5, $10, $20 just to initiate talking with the girl. And this obviously is a huge problem. Some of these girls were not even girls. They were guys. They were men. And they were scammers. And this points to another issue, that scammers were also becoming a bigger issue here. Something that guys and girls here have to understand is that scams are big on these applications. And this is how it works. If anyone knows anything about mobile development, also realize that they need to have as many accounts as possible on these platforms. And this is one of the things I always tell people that complain about these apps. Understand that some of these companies, whether it's ethical or not, create a lot of fake profiles to keep people onto the apps, to give people the mindset that, oh, I will match with this dream girl, or I'll match with this dream guy. That could just be a fake profile. And so when you start understanding kind of the back end development of these apps and how they're designed, you can see through this and understand that these might be fake profiles. So it's not something you should feel bad about if that girl didn't match with you or the guy didn't match with you. This may not even be a real person. This also kind of ties into what I pointed with the scammer effect, and this obviously was also force of what was causing many guys to leave the app, and also women. Decline also, I think, is due to the fact that the expectations are so high. And I'll say for both genders they're high, but especially the expectations on guys that guys have to bring to the table so high nowadays. It's an illusion. I often tell people with relationships, it's an illusion. This is the current day and age that we live in with the millennials. It's an illusion that, or an ideal that someone has. It's not really a person. They think of everything in an ideal. And this is a problem. So they go on a date, some little thing goes wrong, or it's just in the chatting phase, it's sayonara. They're not interested in talking to the guy, or the guy's not interested in talking to the girl in some cases. Also, maybe they meet up, the guy doesn't say the right joke or isn't doing something the proper way, whatever, and the girl's not interested in going out with him again. And the expectations, because remember, if we go back to like 2010, for younger guys here, expectations, I think even then weren't as high. You'd be amazed at how bad it's gotten in our society just like in 10 years. And you didn't need to say the perfect thing or look absolutely perfect or whatever it was. And this is how things have evolved. And this is why it's an unsustainable situation, in my opinion, because no one can be that way. I see this situation often in America. In Canada, girls idolize, they want to be with the pro athlete. Guys, I used to live in Chicago. Patrick Kane's ice hockey, very famous ice hockey player. I used to study in high school with what is now his brother-in-law. The guy I studied with, it was his sister was with Patrick Kane. If anyone knows that ice hockey player, I went to the same high school as her brother. But the thing here is that these are obviously very famous athletes, and it's the same with rock stars, other very wealthy businessmen, and every girl's like, oh, I want to be with that guy, not realizing that a lot of these athletes, they may make a lot of money, they may have a lot of status, they're not terribly interesting people. And if you would realize how close, like for a guy to have like a $2 million contract, or get paid $2,000, or get paid $30 million, I mean, the difference can be very small. And think of all those guys that don't make it to the highest levels. Do you think a lot of the gals are interested in those guys? Probably not. Because a lot of them, I'm not bashing these athletes, I'm just saying they're not terribly interesting people. I've known some of them personally, and they are not very interesting people. I'm not saying they're bad guys, they're just not very interesting. So that obviously is always interesting, that guys are being compared to them. It's like, well, if you took out the athlete or the musician or the some of the zeros out of their status, they wouldn't be very interesting people, honestly. Some would lack character. If you took that out, they would seem like very bland people. But this is just how society is right now. It's very synthetic, it's very fake. And this obviously also extends over to the dating. So often what people are chasing is just the certain perception. And this is, I think, a lot of what these dating apps produce. And like I said, don't think that just because a guy makes a certain amount of money or has a certain amount of status. Yes, I understand. Do women find that appealing? Absolutely. It just as guys find physical beauty very pleasing to the eye in a woman, and youth also, it's very high valued. But just understand that this isn't the only thing there, and just because a guy's not presently making, say, $10 million, that they couldn't be doing that in 5 years' time. But the main issue obviously is just it's this illusion factor that dating apps have created. And I've spoken about this before, about the whole abundance situation, that girls often, women often overestimate the amount of very high status guys on these apps. They overestimate the quantity. The apps present it in a way that's not very accurate. It goes back to what I was talking about with the algorithms, and about there's fake profiles on these apps, and just how they're developed. If you understand the back end of these, it often gives this illusion to women that there's a lot of these baller guys, as we may call them, and this is not often the case. It may seem this way, and then in real life with other dating situations, they think the same way, and then they reach a certain age and like, where are all the good guys gone? It's like, well, perhaps you overestimated how many of those guys even existed, because I think this is actually the case, and there's still a lot more research to be done on this, but I actually see this as being a really big issue that a lot of people don't really talk about. They talk about the issue from the other perspective, but this is something that I see more and more. It plays a kind of a role in these apps and in dating in general, in face-to-face situations. This obviously has contributed to the decline of these apps, and the expectations are just super high what a guy has to bring to the table.